What we're going to do here is we're going to go through the steps of the process that you're going to be relying on as you work on your thought primer homework problems. I'm also going to offer you some tips for how to address these problems. So you want to take really careful notes of everything that we go over here so that you have a better chance of not making errors in your thought primer homework that you have to keep going back and correcting. All right, so let's take a look at the problem we're going to work with here. Kind of overwhelming looking. We've got a lot of tildes. We've got A, we've got a dot, a B, a wedge, an X. First thing you want to make note of is this. When you initially come across a problem you're going to solve, don't let yourself get overwhelmed and distracted by all that is going on in the problem, all the things you don't know about the elements of the problem that you're looking at. Don't focus on those. Instead, focus on what you know. We're always going to want to focus on what we know. And in this case, we know three things. We know that A is true, we know that B is true, and we know that X is unknown. So we should mark the problem to reflect what we know, because the process we're going to use here is to build on what we know to see if we can discover other things we could also know based on what we already know. Okay, so when we look at this problem, there's something else we know. We know that it's a compound proposition. And we also know that every compound proposition has a main operator. Okay. We also know that the main operator of any compound proposition is going to be the operator that's outside of parentheses and brackets other than tilde, unless tilde is the only operator outside of parentheses and brackets. All right. So the next thing we want to do after we've marked the problem to reflect what we know is we want to identify the main operator. So look at this problem. What's the main operator? Seriously, what is it? Now, it might be tempting to say, well, I think it's this wedge here, right? Because this wedge is so far away from any parentheses and brackets that it appears to be an operator other than tilde outside of parentheses and brackets. But look at this bracket right here. And look at this bracket right here. And guess who's hanging out inside those brackets? Our pal our pal wedge. So that means that it's not wedge that's the main operator. It's this guy over here. It's this tilde outside of parentheses and brackets. It's the only operator outside of parentheses and brackets. And so we know that is our main operator. That's the operator we're ultimately seeking the truth value for, because its truth value is going to indicate the truth value for this entire statement. Okay. So now we're continuing on with what we know. We know A and B are true, and we know that that tilde on the far left is our main operator. When you look at this statement, is there anything else you can determine based on what you know? And the answer is, well, yeah. I see these tildes next to the letters A and B, and I know something about tildes. Tildes operate on the letters they appear next to, the letters that follow them, or on the main operator inside parentheses and brackets. Okay, so I know from my rule of negation that anytime a given statement is true, like A and B are here, the tilde is going to be false. So if A is true and B is true, that means tilde A is false and tilde B is false. I can know that. And now I don't even have to worry about the truth values of A and B, because what is more relevant to me are the truth values of these tildes here, because it's the truth values of those tildes that's going to allow us to figure out the truth value for the dot. And the easiest way to figure out the truth value for the dot is to consult our handy-dandy conjunction graphic here. And we just find the line on which what appears on the left-hand side of the dot and on the right-hand side of the dot are both false. And that would be line 4 right here. And that tells us that, oh, you know what? That dot, it's got to be false, because that's what the rule of conjunction says. And now what's relevant to me is this tilde out here. It's the tilde outside of parentheses and brackets. Now remember, tilde does not distribute. What that means is this tilde outside of parentheses wants nothing to do with this tilde here or this tilde here. It wants nothing to do with A, wants nothing to do with B. It wants everything to do with that operator that's inside of brackets. And in this case, that's the dot. So this tilde outside of parentheses is going to operate on that dot. And when we say it operates on it, what we mean is this, is that it applies the rule of negation to the truth value of the dot to determine what the truth value of the tilde is, because they're going to be opposite truth values. Okay? So now think about what we know. We know the truth value for this entire statement here that appears on the left-hand side of our wedge. Is there anything else we can now know? Can we determine the truth value of this wedge still being still not knowing what the truth value of x or tilde x is knowing the truth value of this tilde on the left-hand side of the wedge enough to know what the truth value is of this wedge? Well, I don't know. Let's consult our handy-dandy disjunction graphic, okay? What does this say? It seems to say that anytime the sentence on the left-hand side of a wedge is true, like on lines 1 and 2, the wedge is true. It doesn't matter what the sentence on the right-hand side of the wedge is. You can see here on line 1, statement's true, and on line 2, the statement's false, and it doesn't matter, because only one side of the wedge has to be true for that entire statement to be true, okay? So knowing that this tilde here is true, that lets us know with 100% certainty that that wedge is true. Now, is there anything else we can know now that we figured out that our wedge is a true statement? And the answer is, well, yeah. If this wedge is true, and this tilde is operating on the main operator inside parentheses and brackets, and this wedge is the main operator inside of brackets, then we can determine the truth value of that tilde. It's going to be false. It's going to be the opposite of whatever operator it's operating on, okay? So even though we still don't know what x or tilde x's truth value is, we were able to figure out, just knowing what the truth values are for A and B, what the truth value is of this statement on the left-hand side of the wedge. And that's enough for us to determine the truth value of the wedge operator, and that's enough to allow us to determine the truth value of this tilde that's the main operator, and that's enough to tell us that this sentence is false, okay? So this is the process you're going to use as you work on your thought primer homework. Focus on what you know and ask yourself, based on what I already know, can I deduce anything more? Is there anything else I can be 100% certain about based on what I know?